The lightning split the sky like God's own fury. And that was when Amos Raleigh saw her through the driving rain, a small figure hunched over something in the middle of his pasture. Her body curved protectively against the wind that threatened to tear everything apart. He had been checking the fence line before the storm hit full force, but now he spurred his horse forward, leaning low against the mare's neck as hail began to pelt down in earnest, each frozen stone the size of a man's thumb. As he drew closer, he could see what she was protecting, a newborn foal, its legs still wobbling and uncertain, its coat plastered dark with rain. The woman, whoever she was, had thrown herself over the small creature, her arms wrapped around its trembling body, her face pressed against its neck. She was soaked to the bone, her dark hair hanging in ropes down her back, and she did not look up even as his horse's hooves thundered close. "Madam," he shouted over the roar of the storm, swinging down from his saddle. "Madam, you need to get to shelter." She lifted her head then, and even through the curtain of rain he could see her eyes, green as spring grass and fierce with determination. "The foal," she gasped. "It cannot stand. The mare ran off. I cannot leave it." Amos did not waste time arguing. He pulled off his oilskin coat and wrapped it around the foal, then bent and scooped the small animal into his arms. It could not have been more than a few hours old, still weak and disoriented. "Come on," he said to the woman, jerking his head toward where his barn stood, a dark shadow against the storm-bruised sky perhaps 200 yards away. She scrambled to her feet, stumbling as the wind caught her sodden skirts. Without thinking, Amos shifted the foal to one arm and caught her elbow with his free hand, steadying her. Together they ran, fighting against wind that seemed determined to push them back, while thunder rolled overhead like cannon fire and the world turned white with lightning. The barn doors stood open, banging against their hinges, and Amos pushed the woman through first, then followed with the foal. Inside, the sudden absence of wind felt like stepping into another world entirely. Rain still hammered on the roof, but here at least they were protected from its fury. He carried the foal to an empty stall lined with fresh straw and laid it down gently, checking its breathing, running his hands over its legs to make sure nothing was broken. The little creature whickered softly, its dark eyes rolling with fear and confusion. "There now," Amos murmured, his voice dropping into the low, soothing tone he always used with frightened animals. "You are safe here." When he turned, the woman was standing just inside the stall entrance, water pooling around her feet, her whole body shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Now that he could see her properly in the dim light filtering through the barn's high windows, he realized she was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with delicate features and skin that looked like it had seen too much sun recently. Her dress, though thoroughly ruined by the storm, had once been fine quality, the kind a respectable woman might wear to church. "You are freezing," he said, stating the obvious. "Wait here." He went to the tack room and pulled down a wool blanket, one he kept for cold nights when he needed to stay with a sick animal. When he returned, she was kneeling beside the foal, her hands moving over its body with practiced competence, checking the same things he had checked. "You know horses," he said, draping the blanket around her shoulders. She pulled it tight, but did not stop her examination of the foal. "My father bred them," she said, her voice still shaking with cold but steady underneath. "Back in Missouri before." She trailed off, and something shadowed her face. Amos did not press. Plenty of folks in Kansas in this year of 1883 had stories they did not want to tell, reasons they had come west that were their own business. He had been raised to respect a person's privacy, and besides, he had his own ghosts. "I am Amos Raleigh," he said instead. "This is my land, though I reckon you already figured that part out." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and he found himself oddly conscious of how he must appear, his dark hair plastered to his head, his shirt soaked through despite the oilskin he had given up for the foal, mud streaking his face where the rain had driven dirt against his skin. "Eleanor Zimmerman," she said, "and I apologize for trespassing on your property, Mr. Raleigh. I was walking from town when the storm came up so fast, and then I saw the mare giving birth, and when the lightning spooked her and she ran, I could not just leave the baby." "Just Amos," he said. "And you have nothing to apologize for. Any decent person would have done the same." He crouched down beside her, reaching out to stroke the foal's neck. "The question now is whether we can get it to stand and nurse. Without its mama, it is going to be a challenge. Do you have cow's milk?" Eleanor asked. "Or goat's milk? We can try feeding it by hand until the mare comes back, assuming she does come back." "She will," Amos said with more confidence than he felt. "Storm like this, she probably just panicked. Once it passes, her instinct will bring her home." He stood, offering Eleanor his hand to help her up. Her fingers were ice cold when she took it, and he could feel her trembling through that brief contact. "But you are right about the milk. I have got a cow, and I can milk her while you warm yourself by the stove in the house." Eleanor shook her head, water droplets flying from her hair. "I will stay with the foal. If you can bring the milk here and perhaps something to warm it in." He wanted to argue, to insist she come inside where it was dry and warm, but he recognized the set of her jaw, the stubborn determination in her eyes. He had seen that same expression on his own mother's face often enough to know when a woman had made up her mind. "All right," he said. "But at least change into something dry. I have got some old clothes in the tack room, belonged to my younger brother before he headed to California. They will be too big, but they are better than what you have got on." He showed her where the clothes were stored in a cedar chest, along with another blanket, then headed out through the barn side door to the small house he had built with his own hands 3 years ago, when he had finally saved enough to buy this land. The storm was still raging, though perhaps with slightly less fury than before, and he was soaked through again by the time he reached his kitchen. He built up the fire in the stove quickly, then grabbed a clean bucket and headed to where his cow, Bessie, stood in her small shelter, placidly chewing her cud as if the world was not falling apart outside. He milked her efficiently, his hands moving through the familiar rhythm, then carried the bucket back to the house to warm it gently on the stove. While the milk heated, he found a clean bottle with a rubber nipple that he had used once before for an orphaned calf, washed it thoroughly, and filled it with the warmed milk. He also grabbed a loaf of bread he had baked that morning, some cheese and a jar of preserves, packing them into a basket along with 2 tin cups and a pot of coffee he had boiling on the back of the stove. When he returned to the barn, he found Eleanor had indeed changed clothes. She was swimming in his brother's old shirt and trousers, the sleeves rolled up multiple times, the pant legs bunched around her ankles. She had wrung out her hair and braided it in a thick rope down her back, and though she was still pale with cold, the violent shaking had subsided. "You brought food," she said, eyeing the basket with undisguised hunger. "Figured you might be hungry," Amos said. "When did you last eat?" She hesitated, then admitted, "Yesterday morning." He bit back the questions that wanted to rise, about where she had come from, why she was walking alone, why she looked half-starved. Instead, he simply set the basket down on a bale of hay and gestured for her to help herself while he turned his attention to the foal. The little creature was still lying down, but its eyes were more alert now, and it tried to lift its head as Amos approached. He knelt beside it, speaking softly, running his hands along its body to calm it before carefully lifting its head and trying to get the bottle's nipple into its mouth. At first the foal fought him, turning its head away, but Eleanor was suddenly there beside him, her hand on the foal's neck, her voice joining his in a low murmur of reassurance. Together they coaxed and encouraged, and finally, the foal latched onto the nipple and began to suck. "There we go," Eleanor breathed, her face lighting up with a smile that transformed her entirely. "That is it, little one. Drink." They sat there together in the straw, holding the bottle steady, their shoulders nearly touching, and something passed between them in that moment. Something Amos could not quite name but felt nonetheless, like a current of electricity that had nothing to do with the lightning still flickering outside. When the foal had drunk its fill and lay back down, seemingly content for now, Amos and Eleanor moved to the bale of hay where he had left the food. She fell on the bread and cheese like she was starving, which perhaps she was, and he poured coffee for them both, watching her over the rim of his cup. "So," he said carefully, "you were walking from Wichita." She swallowed a mouthful of bread and nodded. "I arrived on the train yesterday afternoon. I was told there was a ranch about 10 miles north that was looking for help, someone who knew horses. I thought I could walk it, but I did not account for the storm." 10 miles, Amos repeated. "That would be the Patterson place." "But they are not looking for help, not that I have heard, and I would have heard. News travels in these parts." Eleanor's face fell, and for the first time he saw fear flicker behind her eyes. "Oh," she said quietly, "I see." "Who told you about this job?" Amos asked. She looked down at her hands. "A man at the train station. He said he had heard the Pattersons were looking for a horse trainer, someone who could work with their breeding stock. He seemed kind, and I thought—" She trailed off, then laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "I was a fool." "No," Amos said firmly. "You were trusting. There is a difference." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Do you have anywhere else to go? Family, friends?" The look she gave him was answer enough even before she spoke. "No. My father died 6 months ago. Debts I did not know about took everything, and my mother passed when I was 16. I have an aunt in Missouri, but she made it clear I was not welcome when I showed up on her doorstep after the funeral. I heard there were opportunities out west for people willing to work hard, so I spent the last of my money on a train ticket. The storm was beginning to ease now, the thunder growing more distant, the rain settling into a steady drum rather than a pounding roar. In the relative quiet, Amos could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the decision forming in his mind. "I have got about 30 horses," he said. "Mostly I ranch cattle, but I have been building up my horse stock, breeding them for ranchers who need good working animals. The problem is I know cattle. Horses, I am still learning. I could use someone who really understands them, someone who can help me train them properly, get them ready for sale." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you a place to stay and 3 meals a day in exchange for honest work," Amos said. "The pay would not be much, not at first anyway, but there is a small room off the kitchen in the house that you could have. It is not fancy, but it is dry and warm and safe." "Why?" Eleanor asked bluntly. "You do not know me. I could be a thief or worse." Amos smiled despite himself. "A thief who throws herself over a dying foal in the middle of a lightning storm. I will take my chances." He grew serious. "Look, Miss Zimmerman, I am not going to lie to you. This is hard country, and the work is hard too. But I am an honest man, and I give you my word that you will be treated with respect under my roof. If you want to leave tomorrow or next week or next month, you are free to do so. But right now, you need help, and I need help, and it seems to me that is what neighbors do. They help each other out." She studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face as if trying to read the truth of his character written there. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "All right," she said. "I accept your offer, Mr. Raleigh, and thank you." "Amos," he corrected again. "If we are going to be working together, we might as well use Christian names." "Amos," she repeated, and he liked the way it sounded in her voice. "Then you should call me Eleanor or Ellie. That is what my father always called me." They finished their food in companionable silence, checking on the foal periodically. The little creature seemed to be settling, its breathing even, its legs tucked beneath it in sleep. Outside, the storm finally broke, the clouds parting to reveal a sky washed clean and glittering with early evening stars. "The mare," Eleanor said suddenly, standing and moving to the barn doors. "Should we look for her?" "In the morning," Amos said. "It is getting dark, and if she is out there, she will find her way home. Horses have better night vision than we do, and she will want to find her baby." He led Eleanor through the muddy yard to the house, holding a lantern high to light their way. The house was small but solidly built, with a main room that served as kitchen and living space, a bedroom, and the small room off the kitchen that he had mentioned. Barely more than a closet, really. But it had a narrow bed and a window that looked out toward the horse pasture. "It is not much," he said, suddenly conscious of how rough and plain everything must seem. But Eleanor was looking around with something like wonder in her eyes. "It is clean," she said, "and warm, and it is more than I had this morning." She turned to him, and there were tears shining in her eyes now. "Thank you, Amos, truly. You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect." He felt his cheeks heat and ducked his head, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Well," he said gruffly, "you should rest. Tomorrow will be a full day, and if that foal makes it through the night, we will have our work cut out for us." He showed her where the wash basin and fresh towels were, pointed out the privy outside, and then retreated to his own room, closing the door between them. He lay in his bed for a long time, listening to the sounds of her moving around the house, water splashing as she washed, the creak of the bed in the small room as she lay down. He had not been lying when he told her he could use help with the horses, but the truth was more complicated than that. He had been alone on this land for 3 years now, working from sunup to sundown, building something that would last, something he could be proud of. And somewhere along the way, the loneliness had started to eat at him, making him wonder what the point was of building a future if there was no one to share it with. He had not been looking for anyone, had convinced himself he was content with his solitude. But then he had seen her in the storm, fierce and determined, putting herself between danger and a helpless creature without a thought for her own safety. And something in his chest had shifted, like a key turning in a lock he had not known was closed. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, he dreamed of green eyes and the sound of a woman's voice murmuring comfort to a frightened foal. He woke before dawn, as he always did, and moved quietly through the house so as not to disturb Eleanor. But when he reached the kitchen, he found her already there, dressed again in his brother's 2 large clothes, building up the fire in the stove. "Could not sleep?" he asked. She jumped, whirling around, then relaxed when she saw it was him. "I was worried about the foal," she admitted. "I thought I would check on it and perhaps prepare breakfast if you have ingredients. I am a decent cook, at least. That is something I can contribute. You do not have to earn your keep before you have even been here a full day," Amos said, but he was touched by the offer nonetheless. "But if you want to check the foal, I will come with you." They walked through the pre-dawn darkness together, the world still and quiet after the violence of the storm. The air smelled of rain and wet earth, and the stars were beginning to fade as the eastern horizon turned pale with approaching light. In the barn, the foal was standing, a bit wobbly but upright, and as they entered the stall, they heard a familiar sound, the low nicker of a mare. There in the shadows stood the mother horse, her coat streaked with mud, a cut on her shoulder where she had scraped against something in her flight, but otherwise unharmed. She was nuzzling her baby, making soft sounds of reassurance and greeting. "She came back," Eleanor breathed, her face radiant with joy. "Oh, she came back." They watched as the foal, guided by instinct and its mother's encouragement, found the mare's teat and began to nurse properly. The mare stood patiently, her eyes half closed with contentment, and Amos felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had not known he was carrying. "We should clean that cut," he said quietly, "but I think they are going to be all right." They worked together to tend the mare, Eleanor's hands confident and gentle as she cleaned the wound while Amos held the horse's halter and spoke softly to keep her calm. The mare accepted their ministrations without fuss, as if she understood they meant her no harm. By the time they finished, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Amos showed Eleanor around the property in the growing light, introducing her to the other horses in the near pasture, the cattle grazing on the far hills, the chickens that scratched around the barn looking for breakfast. "It is beautiful here," Eleanor said, shading her eyes to look out across the land. "Peaceful." "It can be," Amos agreed, "though there is nothing peaceful about it when a steer decides it does not want to go where you are herding it or when you are trying to break a green horse to saddle." He glanced at her. "Think you can handle that kind of work?" She met his eyes squarely. "I know I can. My father started teaching me when I was 5 years old. By the time I was 12, I could break and train a horse as well as any of his ranch hands. I have gentled horses that no one else could get near, have trained them for riding, for driving, for ranch work. I may not look like much, Mr. Amos, but I promise you, I know what I am doing." There was pride in her voice and something more, a need to prove herself, to show that she had value. He understood that need, had felt it himself often enough. "All right then," he said. "After breakfast we will see what you can do." Eleanor proved herself before the morning was half over. Amos had a 3-year-old gelding that he had been working with for weeks. A strong animal with good conformation, but a stubborn streak that made him difficult to handle. The horse shied away from the bit, tossed his head when Amos tried to saddle him, and generally made clear his displeasure with the whole idea of being ridden. Eleanor watched Amos struggle with the animal for a few minutes, then quietly asked if she could try. He stepped back, prepared to see her fail, to understand that some horses just took more time than others. Instead, Eleanor approached the gelding with a calm confidence that made Amos pause. She did not go straight for him, but instead moved around the corral, letting the horse watch her, get used to her presence. She talked to him in a low voice, not sweet talking exactly, but firm and steady, the tone of someone who expected to be listened to and obeyed. After a few minutes, the gelding's ears swiveled toward her, tracking her movements. She moved closer, still talking, and when she finally reached out to touch his neck, he did not shy away. She ran her hands over him, checking his legs, his back, his mouth, and the horse stood still, his eyes fixed on her as if mesmerized. "You have been using too much force," she said to Amos without looking away from the horse. "He is not stubborn, he is scared. Something about the saddle or the bit hurts him, and he has learned to associate them with pain." She examined the saddle Amos had been using, running her fingers along the inside, and made a small sound of discovery. "There," she said, pointing to a place where the leather had worn and a hard edge had formed. "That is pressing right where his withers are most sensitive. No wonder he does not want you on his back." Amos felt his face heat with embarrassment. He should have noticed that himself, should have checked more carefully. But Eleanor did not seem to be judging him, merely solving the problem. She found another saddle, one with softer leather, and showed Amos how to position it differently, how to adjust the cinch so it was secure without being painfully tight. Then she repeated her patient process of getting the horse used to the saddle's weight before finally, smoothly, swinging herself up into it. The gelding sidestepped once, twice, then settled. Eleanor sat easy in the saddle, her hands light on the reins, her body moving with the horse's movements rather than fighting against them. She walked him around the corral, then urged him into a trot, then a canter, and the horse responded as if they had been working together for years. When she finally slid down and led the horse back to where Amos stood, the gelding was calm and responsive, his earlier fear seemingly forgotten. "Well," Amos said, because he could not think of anything else to say, "I guess you were telling the truth about knowing horses." Eleanor's smile was radiant. "I told you I could help." They worked together all that day and into the next week, falling into a rhythm that felt natural despite how recently they had met. Eleanor proved to be everything she had claimed and more: patient with the horses, creative in her training methods, and absolutely fearless when it came to handling even the most difficult animals. But it was not just her skill that Amos found himself noticing. It was the way she laughed when a particularly stubborn horse finally gave in and followed her commands, the way she sang softly to the animals as she worked with them, old songs that Amos did not recognize but found beautiful nonetheless. It was the way she looked in the early morning light, her face turned toward the rising sun, or the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on something. He found himself making excuses to work near her, to bring her coffee in the middle of the morning, to ask her opinion on things he could easily have decided himself. He told himself it was just because she was the first real company he had had in months, that anyone would enjoy having another person around after so long alone. But he knew he was lying to himself. Eleanor seemed to be settling in as well. Color returned to her cheeks as she ate regular meals, and the haunted look in her eyes began to fade. She made the little room off the kitchen her own, hanging curtains she sewed from fabric she found in an old trunk, placing wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. In the evenings, they sat together in the main room, Amos mending tack or carving while Eleanor read aloud from the books he had on his shelf, her voice bringing to life stories of adventure and romance, of far-off places neither of them had seen. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, the things that had shaped them into who they were. Amos learned that Eleanor's mother had died of pneumonia, that her father had never quite recovered from the loss, had thrown himself into his work with horses as a way to avoid his grief. He learned that she had been engaged once, to a young man her father approved of, but that she had broken it off when she realized she did not love him, could not imagine spending her life with someone she felt nothing for. "My father was so angry," she said one night, staring into the fire. "He said I was foolish, that love was a luxury and what mattered was security and respectability. But I could not do it, Amos. I could not wake up every day next to someone I did not love and pretend that was enough." "That does not make you foolish," Amos said quietly. "That makes you brave." She looked at him then, her eyes soft in the firelight, and something passed between them, something warm and tender and frightening in its intensity. He told her about his own family, about growing up in Kentucky, about how he had come west after his parents died within a year of each other, looking for a fresh start. He told her about the years he had spent working other men's ranches, saving every penny he could, learning everything there was to know about cattle and horses and surviving in this hard country. "I wanted something that was mine," he said. Something I built with my own hands that no one could take away. This land, this ranch, it is not much compared to the big spreads, but it is mine. It is more than most people ever have, Eleanor said softly. You should be proud. The weeks turned into a month, and then 6 weeks, and the work of the ranch continued around them. They sold 3 horses to a rancher from Colorado who was passing through and heard about Eleanor's training skills. The money was good, better than Amos had hoped, and he immediately gave Eleanor half. That is too much, she protested. I have room and board, you do not need to pay me this much. It is what you earned, Amos said firmly. Those horses sold for twice what I would have gotten for them without your training. You deserve your share. She looked at the money in her hand, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea what it means to me to have something of my own again, to not be dependent on anyone's charity. It is not charity, Amos said, uncomfortable with her tears even as he understood them. It is what you have worked for. But as he watched her carefully fold the bills and tuck them away, he realized with a jolt that he did not want her to save up money to leave. The thought of her going, of the house being empty again, of working these fields alone without her laughter and her songs, filled him with a dread so profound it nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. He was falling in love with her, he realized. Had probably been falling in love with her from the moment he saw her shielding that foal from the storm, fierce and determined and completely unaware of how extraordinary she was. The realization terrified him. What if she did not feel the same? What if she saw him only as an employer, a temporary stop on her journey to somewhere else? What if he told her how he felt and she left, unable to bear the awkwardness of staying? He kept his feelings to himself, but it grew harder every day. Harder when she smiled at him over breakfast, when their hands brushed as they worked together, when she fell asleep in the chair by the fire, and he had to resist the urge to gather her in his arms and carry her to bed. It was Eleanor who finally broke the careful peace between them. They had been working with a young mare that Eleanor thought could be trained for trick riding, the kind of fancy work that traveling shows paid good money for. The mare was smart and agile, but she needed to trust her rider completely, and Eleanor had been spending hours every day building that trust. On this particular afternoon, she was trying to get the mare to rear up on command, a trick that looked impressive but required perfect timing and balance. Amos was watching from the fence, ready to step in if anything went wrong. Eleanor signaled the mare, and the horse reared beautifully, her front hooves pawing the air. But something startled her at the top of the rear, maybe a bird flying too close or a sudden sound, and she came down hard and off balance. Eleanor, caught by surprise, slipped from the saddle and hit the ground with a sickening thud. Amos was over the fence and running before he even registered moving. He dropped to his knees beside Eleanor, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. "Ellie," he said, his voice breaking on her name. "Ellie, talk to me." Her eyes fluttered open, dazed and unfocused. "I am all right," she mumbled. "Just had the wind knocked out of me." He ran his hands over her, checking for broken bones, for signs of serious injury. When he was satisfied that she was bruised but not badly hurt, he gathered her into his arms and just held her, pressing his face into her hair, his whole body shaking with reaction. "You scared me," he said roughly. "God, Ellie, you scared me so badly." He felt her arms come around him, tentative at first, then tighter. "I am all right," she repeated, but her voice was different now, softer. "Amos, I am all right." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the expression on her face made his breath catch. She was looking at him like he was something precious, like he mattered, and before he could talk himself out of it, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she did not pull away. Instead, she kissed him back, her hands coming up to cup his face, and the world narrowed down to just this moment. Just the two of them in the dust of the corral with the sun warm on their backs and their hearts beating against each other. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. Eleanor's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Amos admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I was afraid. Afraid you would leave, afraid I was reading things wrong, afraid of ruining what we have." "You were not reading anything wrong," Eleanor said, her smile tremulous and beautiful. "I have been falling in love with you since the night you brought me into your barn and gave me your coat for a newborn foal. I just did not think someone like you could ever want someone like me." "Someone like you," Amos repeated incredulously. "Ellie, you are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. I wake up every morning grateful that you are here, and I go to sleep every night terrified that you will realize you could do so much better than a struggling rancher with more dreams than sense." She laughed, and it was a sound of pure joy. "You are not struggling, you are building something wonderful, and as for doing better, there is no better, Amos, not for me." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, pouring all the feelings he had been holding back into that kiss. When they finally stood up, brushing the dust from their clothes, they were grinning at each other like fools. The mare, forgotten in the drama, was standing a few yards away, watching them with what Amos could have sworn was a judgmental expression. "I should check on her," Eleanor said, but she did not let go of Amos's hand. "In a minute," he said. "Right now, I just want to stand here and look at you and know that you feel the same way I do." So they stood there, hands linked, smiling at each other, while the sun moved across the sky and the mare eventually wandered off to find better entertainment. Everything changed after that, and yet nothing changed at all. They still worked together every day, still ate meals together, still sat by the fire in the evenings. But now, Amos could hold her hand when they walked, could steal kisses when they were alone, could tell her he loved her and hear her say it back. He moved slower than he wanted to, conscious of propriety and what people in town might say if they knew Eleanor was living under his roof. But Eleanor seemed content with their courtship, with the slow building of something real and lasting between them. 2 months after that first kiss, on a Sunday afternoon when the work was done and the weather was fine, Amos took Eleanor to the top of the highest hill on his property. From there, you could see for miles, the grasslands rolling away like waves on an ocean, the cottonwoods marking where the creek ran, the ranch buildings small and neat in the distance. "I come up here sometimes," he said, "when I need to think or when I want to remind myself why I am doing all this." Eleanor turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It is beautiful," she said. "You can see everything from here." "That is why I brought you here," Amos said. He reached into his pocket, feeling the small box there, the ring he had bought in town 2 weeks ago from the jeweler who had looked at him knowingly and wished him luck. "Because I want to show you what our future could look like if you will have me." He dropped to one knee, and Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes going wide. "Eleanor Zimmerman," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I know we have not known each other long by most people's standards. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life than I am of this. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your fierce heart. I love the way you sing to the horses and the way you laugh when I say something stupid. I love waking up knowing you are under my roof and going to sleep hoping you will still be there in the morning. I want to build a life with you, a real life, a forever life. Will you marry me?" He opened the box, showing her the ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had cost him more than he wanted to admit but was worth every penny to see the look on her face. "Yes," Eleanor said, and she was crying now, happy tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Amos, of course yes. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and joy and relief flooding through him. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Wichita, with half the town there to witness it. Amos had worried that people would gossip, would say unkind things about how fast they had moved, but instead, everyone seemed genuinely happy for them. Several of the ranchers' wives took Eleanor aside to welcome her, to offer friendship and advice, and Amos saw her eyes grow bright with gratitude at being accepted so readily. They held the reception at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food brought by neighbors who had become friends. There was music and dancing, and Amos held his bride close and thought he had never been happier in his entire life. That night, when all the guests had finally left, and they were alone in the house that was now truly theirs together, Eleanor stood by the window looking out at the stars. "What are you thinking?" Amos asked, coming to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I am thinking about that night in the storm," she said, leaning back against him. "How terrified I was, how lost I felt. And how you appeared out of nowhere like something out of a story, and you saved me. You saved us both, me and that little foal." "You saved yourself," Amos said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I just gave you a place to land." "You gave me everything," Eleanor said, turning in his arms to face him. "A home, a purpose, a future, and most of all you gave me love, real love, the kind I did not think I would ever find." "I am the one who should be thanking you," Amos said. "This house was just a building before you came. You made it a home. You made my life mean something beyond just surviving, just getting through another day. You gave me a reason to dream again." They held each other as the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them. Two people who had found each other against all odds in the middle of a storm, and had decided to build something beautiful together. The years that followed were not always easy. There were droughts that tested their endurance, winters that seemed like they would never end, sicknesses that struck the animals and had to be nursed through with endless patience. There were times when money was tight, and they had to make hard choices about which debts to pay first, which repairs could wait another season. But through it all, they had each other. When Amos was discouraged, Eleanor was there to remind him how far they had come, how much they had built together. When Eleanor was exhausted from long days of training difficult horses, Amos was there to rub her sore shoulders and make her laugh with silly stories. Their horse breeding and training program grew in reputation. People came from 3 counties away to buy horses trained by Eleanor Raleigh, knowing they would be getting animals that were not just broken to saddle but truly educated, responsive to the lightest touch, calm in the face of danger. Amos focused on the cattle operation, building their herd slowly but steadily, always mindful of the quality of the stock. They expanded the house, adding a proper parlor and a second bedroom, though they continued to share the main bedroom, neither wanting to sleep apart. They built a new barn, larger and sturdier than the old one, with proper stalls for the horses and a loft for hay storage. The foal that Eleanor had saved grew into a beautiful mare, and Eleanor kept her, trained her with special care, and eventually bred her to one of their finest stallions. That first offspring sold for more money than they had ever gotten for a single horse, and Amos insisted on putting half of it aside in an account under Eleanor's name alone. "You never know," he said when she protested. "I want you to have something that is entirely yours, that you could use if you ever needed it." I am never going to need it, Eleanor said firmly, because I am never going anywhere without you. Still, she let him put the money aside, touched by his insistence that she have her own security, her own independence within their marriage. 2 years after their wedding, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Amos on a spring morning, standing in the kitchen with the sun streaming through the windows and her hands twisted nervously in her apron. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said, and her voice was a mixture of joy and fear. Amos crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Ellie, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face. "I know we have not talked much about children and with the ranch so busy." "Happy," Amos said incredulously. "I am terrified and thrilled and so full of joy I can barely contain it. Yes, I am happy. Are you?" "I am scared," Eleanor admitted. "My mother died when I was young and I barely remember her. I do not know how to be a mother. What if I am no good at it?" "You are going to be wonderful," Amos said with absolute certainty. "You are patient and kind and fierce when you need to be. And besides, we will figure it out together, the same way we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor suffered from sickness in the early months that left her weak and miserable. Amos took over more of the horse training, following her instructions but lacking her natural gift, frustrated when the animals did not respond to him the way they did to her. As Eleanor's belly grew, she had to give up the physical work of training entirely, which chafed at her independent nature. She spent her time instead planning for the baby, sewing tiny clothes, reading every book she could find about childbirth and infant care. The baby was born on a cold November night, arriving 3 weeks earlier than expected. Amos rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife from town, his heart in his throat the entire way. By the time they returned, Eleanor's labor was well advanced, and there was nothing for Amos to do but wait in the kitchen, pacing and praying and listening to the sounds coming from the bedroom. When the midwife finally emerged, she was smiling. "You have a son," she said, "a strong, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully." Amos went into the bedroom on shaking legs. Eleanor was propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she pulled back the blanket, Amos saw a small red face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth pursed in sleep. "Come meet your son," Eleanor said softly. Amos sat carefully on the edge of the bed and reached out to touch the baby's hand. Tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and something in his chest cracked open, letting in a flood of love so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are both perfect." They named him Thomas after Amos's father, and from the moment he entered the world, he changed everything. The house that had been quiet now rang with his cries, his gurgles, his laughter as he grew. Amos, who had never imagined himself as a father, discovered reserves of patience and tenderness he had not known he possessed. Eleanor bloomed in motherhood despite her earlier fears. She was gentle but firm with Thomas, teaching him even as a baby that the world was a safe place to explore. As he grew into a toddler, she included him in the work of the ranch, letting him toddle after her in the barn, holding him in the saddle as she rode gentle horses around the corral. "He is going to be a natural horseman," she said one afternoon when Thomas was 2 years old, watching with delight as he fearlessly patted the nose of a mare 3 times his height. "Just like his mother. And just as stubborn as his father," Amos added, scooping his son up and tossing him in the air, delighting in the shriek of laughter that resulted. When Thomas was 3, Eleanor became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to work almost up until the day she went into labor. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, arrived on a warm spring morning, as different from her brother as could be. Where Thomas had been loud and demanding, Sarah was quiet and watchful, her dark eyes taking in everything around her with solemn intensity. "She is going to be the smart one," Eleanor predicted, cradling her daughter close. "The one who sees everything and says little." She was right. As the children grew, Thomas proved to be all action and energy, always running, always exploring, always getting into some kind of mischief. Sarah was thoughtful and careful, content to sit for hours watching her mother work with the horses or her father mend equipment, asking questions that showed she was thinking deeply about how things worked. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They hired help, first one ranch hand, then two, then eventually a small crew of men who worked the cattle and helped maintain the buildings and fences. But the horses remained Eleanor's domain, and she guarded it jealously, training each one herself or supervising closely when one of the hands was working with them. Amos found himself taking on leadership roles in the community, serving on the town council, helping to organize the building of a new school, mediating disputes between neighbors. He was respected for his fairness and his common sense, and people came to him for advice on everything from water rights to horse breeding. But no matter how busy they became, no matter how much the ranch demanded of them, they always made time for each other. They still sat together in the evenings after the children were in bed, talking over the day, making plans for the future. They still took walks together on Sunday afternoons, holding hands like newlyweds. They still looked at each other across a crowded room and smiled, sharing a private moment that no one else could intrude upon. When Thomas was 8 and Sarah was 5, a telegram arrived that changed Eleanor's carefully ordered world. Her aunt in Missouri, the one who had turned her away years ago, had died and left her entire estate to Eleanor, her only surviving relative. "I do not want it," Eleanor said flatly, staring at the telegram. "She made her feelings about me perfectly clear. Why would she do this now?" Amos read the telegram over her shoulder. The estate was substantial, including the house Eleanor had grown up in and several hundred acres of land. "Maybe she regretted how she treated you," he suggested. "Maybe this is her way of apologizing." "It is too late for apologies," Eleanor said, but there was pain in her voice, old hurt rising to the surface. They traveled to Missouri that summer, the whole family making the journey by train. Eleanor was tense and quiet during the trip, her hands clenched in her lap, her jaw tight. Thomas and Sarah sensed their mother's mood and stayed unusually quiet, pressing close to Amos and looking at Eleanor with worried eyes. The house was just as Eleanor remembered it, a large 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and an apple orchard behind it. Walking through the rooms, seeing her childhood possessions still in place, brought tears to her eyes. "This was my room," she said, standing in a small bedroom with faded wallpaper. "I remember lying in that bed and listening to my mother sing. I remember being so happy." They stayed for a week, sorting through belongings, meeting with lawyers, deciding what to do with the property. In the end, Eleanor decided to sell the house but keep the land. "Maybe someday Thomas or Sarah will want to come back here," she said, "build something of their own. But for me, home is in Kansas with you." The money from the sale added significantly to their savings, providing a cushion of security they had never had before. Amos insisted again that Eleanor keep it in her own account, and this time she agreed, understanding his need to know she was provided for, that she had choices. The years continued to roll past, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a tall, strong young man with his father's steady temperament and his mother's way with horses. Sarah developed a love of books and learning, and Amos found himself riding into Wichita once a month to buy her new volumes, delighting in her excitement when he brought them home. They weathered a terrible drought when Thomas was 12, watching helplessly as their pastures turned brown and cattle prices plummeted. They sold off part of the herd at a loss and survived on their horse sales until the rains finally came again. They lived through a winter when influenza swept through the county, taking many of the old and very young, and they thanked God every day that their own children were spared. Through it all, their love remained the foundation everything else was built on. Amos never stopped being grateful that he had ridden out into that storm, that he had found Eleanor when she needed him most. Eleanor never stopped being amazed that she had stumbled, lost and desperate, onto land owned by a man who would see her not as a burden but as a gift. When Thomas turned 18, he announced his intention to start his own ranch further west in Colorado. "I want to build something the way you did, Pa," he said. "Start with nothing and make it into something I can be proud of." It was hard to let him go, but Amos and Eleanor understood. They gave him half a dozen of their best horses, including a stallion and 2 mares for breeding, and enough money to buy land. They watched him ride away with tears in their eyes but pride in their hearts. Sarah showed no interest in leaving. She married at 21, a young teacher from town named William Hartley, who loved her intelligence and her quiet strength. They built a house on the ranch property, close enough to the main house that Sarah could help her mother with the horses while William taught at the school in Wichita. More grandchildren arrived, first Thomas's son from Colorado, born the same year Sarah had her daughter. The house that had once held just Amos and Eleanor now rang with the voices of children and grandchildren, especially during holidays when everyone gathered. Amos and Eleanor slowed down as they aged, hiring more help to handle the physical demands of the ranch, but they never stopped working entirely. Eleanor still trained the most difficult horses, still had that magic touch that could calm even the wildest animal. Amos still rode the fence lines every morning, still made the decisions about which cattle to sell and which to keep. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Amos took Eleanor back to the hilltop where he had proposed. They were both grayer now, their hands weathered from work, their faces lined with the evidence of years in the sun. But when they looked at each other, they saw the same people they had been at the beginning, young and hopeful and in love. 25 years, Eleanor said, leaning against Amos's shoulder as they looked out over the land. It has gone by so fast. And yet when I think about it, I can remember every day, Amos said. Every morning waking up beside you, every evening sitting together, every challenge we faced and overcame together. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that storm had not come? Eleanor asked. If I had made it to the Patterson place, or if you had not found me? I try not to, Amos said honestly, because thinking about a world where we never met, where we did not have this life together, is too painful to bear. Eleanor turned to face him, reaching up to cup his cheek. I was so lost that night, she said. So scared and alone and convinced I had made a terrible mistake coming west. And then you appeared, and everything changed. You gave me hope when I had none, a home when I had nowhere to go, and love when I did not think I deserved it. You deserved everything good this world has to offer, Amos said fiercely. And I have spent every day trying to give it to you. You have, Eleanor said, her eyes bright with tears. You have given me everything, a purpose, a family, a life full of meaning. I could not have asked for more. They held each other as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Two people who had found each other in a storm and built a life that weathered every challenge, a love that only deepened with time. As they grew older still, into their 60s and then 70s, they remained inseparable. When Amos's knees began to give him trouble, making it hard to mount a horse, Eleanor was there to help him, her touch gentle but her voice firmly telling him not to be stubborn about accepting help. When Eleanor's eyesight began to fade, making it dangerous for her to work with the wilder horses, Amos took over that part of the training, following her instructions precisely because he trusted her judgment completely. They spent their evenings in the same chairs they had sat in for decades, watching the sun set through the window, holding hands and talking over the day. Sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of deep companionship, where words are unnecessary because each knows what the other is thinking. Their children and grandchildren visited often, the house always full of noise and laughter during holidays and special occasions. Thomas brought his family from Colorado every summer, his own ranch having flourished into something impressive. Sarah and her family were constants, there for Sunday dinners and helping with the work of the ranch. The ranch itself had become one of the most successful operations in the county, known for producing exceptional horses and quality cattle. But more than that, it was known as a place where people were treated fairly, where a handshake meant something, where your word was your bond. That reputation was worth more than any amount of money, and Amos and Eleanor had built it together through decades of honest work and fair dealing. On a warm evening in late spring, when Amos was 76 and Eleanor was 74, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the land they had worked together for so many years. The old foal that Eleanor had saved, now a mare in her 20s, grazed peacefully in the near pasture with her own grand foals, a living testament to that stormy night when everything had changed. "You remember that night?" Eleanor asked, following Amos's gaze to the mare. "Really remember it? Not just the story we have told so many times, but how it actually felt." Amos was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I remember being terrified when I saw you out there," he said finally. "Terrified that you would be hurt by the lightning or the hail, that I would not reach you in time. And then when I got close and saw what you were doing, protecting that little foal with your own body, I remember thinking I had never seen anything braver." "I was not brave," Eleanor said. "I was just doing what needed to be done. I could not leave it to die." "That is what bravery is," Amos said. "Not the absence of fear, but doing what is right despite the fear. You have always had that quality, Ellie. It is one of the things I loved about you from the very beginning." "I remember being so cold," Eleanor said softly, "and so scared. Not just of the storm, but of everything. I had lost my father, my home, everything I had known, and I was alone in a strange place with no idea what was going to happen to me. And then you appeared, and you did not just save me from the storm, you saved me from despair." She turned to look at him, this man she had loved for more than half her life, and smiled. "You gave me everything, Amos. Everything that has meaning in my life came from that night, from your kindness in bringing me to your barn." "We gave each other everything," Amos corrected gently. "I was alone too, Ellie, before you came. I had land and animals and work, but I did not have a life, not really. You brought joy and purpose and love into this house. You turned it from a place I slept into a home I loved. Every good thing in my life since that night has been because of you." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, one by one, like promises being kept. Inside the house, they could hear Sarah and William's voices, their daughter and son-in-law having come for dinner and stayed to help with some repairs. Tomorrow there would be work to do, horses to train, cattle to check on, the endless cycle of life on a ranch. But tonight, there was just this. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through hard work and determination and love, sitting side by side and watching the stars emerge, content in the knowledge that they had created something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. "I love you," Eleanor said, the words as natural as breathing after all these years. "I love you too," Amos replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Every day of my life I have loved you." The years continued to be kind to them, allowing them to remain active and engaged with the ranch and their family well into their 80s. They slowed down, certainly, but they never stopped. Eleanor still went to the barn every morning to check on the horses, still offered advice on training techniques to the younger workers. Amos still walked the property, still made decisions about which direction the ranch should grow. When Amos turned 80, the community threw him a celebration at the town hall in Wichita. People came from all over the county to honor the man who had been a pillar of their community for so long. There were speeches and tributes, stories shared of his fairness and generosity, his wisdom and his kindness. But the moment that meant the most to Amos came when Eleanor stood up to speak. She was 82 now, her hair completely white, her face deeply lined, but her eyes were as green and fierce as they had been the night he found her in the storm. "I am not much for public speaking," she said, her voice still strong and clear. "But I wanted to say a few words about my husband. 57 years ago, Amos Raleigh found me in the middle of a terrible storm, protecting a newborn foal. He could have ridden past, could have left me to fend for myself. Instead, he brought me to his barn, gave me shelter, offered me work and dignity when I had nothing. But more than that, he gave me love. He saw me not as a burden or a charity case, but as a person of value. He built a life with me, raised children with me, and made every day of the past 57 years an adventure worth living. I am the luckiest woman alive to have spent my life with this man, and I want everyone here to know that everything good about this ranch, about our family, about the life we have built, exists because Amos Raleigh has a heart as big as this Kansas sky." There was not a dry eye in the room when she finished, least of all Amos's own. He stood and went to her, taking her hands in his and kissed her in front of the entire community, not caring who saw or what they thought. They continued on, season following season, year following year. They celebrated the birth of great-grandchildren, attended weddings and graduations, mourned the loss of friends who had journeyed with them through life. Through it all, they remained each other's constant companion, the person they wanted to share every joy with, the person they turned to in times of sorrow. On a crisp autumn morning when Amos was 87 and Eleanor was 85, they rode together up to the hilltop where Amos had proposed so many decades before. It took them longer to make the climb than it once had, and they had to stop several times to rest the horses, but neither suggested turning back. From the top, they looked out over the land that had been their life's work. The ranch stretched out below them, larger now than it had been but still recognizable, still home. In the distance, they could see Sarah's house, smoke rising from its chimney. Further out, they could see the new barn that had been built just last year, modern and efficient, but designed to echo the lines of the old barn where Amos had brought Eleanor on that stormy night. "We did good work here," Amos said, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "Built something that will last." "We did," Eleanor agreed, leaning into him. "And we did it together, every step of the way." They stayed on that hilltop for hours, remembering and dreaming, talking and sitting in comfortable silence. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in glorious shades of pink and orange and purple, Eleanor turned to Amos with a smile. "You know what I wish?" she asked. "What is that?" Amos replied, tucking a strand of white hair behind her ear. "I wish we could do it all over again," she said. "Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would not change a single thing." "Neither would I," Amos said, his voice thick with emotion. "Except maybe I would have kissed you sooner, that first day, instead of waiting weeks." Eleanor laughed, the sound rich and warm and full of life. "You kissed me exactly when you were supposed to," she said. "Everything happened exactly as it was meant to." They rode back down the hill as darkness fell, their horses picking their way carefully down the path they had traveled countless times. When they reached the barn, they tended to the horses together, moving in the synchronized rhythm of people who had worked side by side for decades. In the house, Sarah had left dinner warming on the stove for them, and they ate together at the old wooden table Amos had built when they were first married. After dinner, they sat in their chairs by the fire, Eleanor reading aloud from a book even though her eyes were tired, because she knew Amos loved the sound of her voice. When the fire burned down to embers and the clock struck 10, they went to bed, lying side by side in the bed they had shared for 57 years. Amos reached over and took Eleanor's hand, their fingers interlacing naturally. "Good night, my love," he said, the words the same ones he had said every night for all their years together. "Good night," Eleanor replied. "I love you more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." It was their ritual, the promise they had made to each other long ago, that their love would always grow, always deepen, always be the foundation on which everything else was built. They fell asleep holding hands, two people who had found each other in a storm and built a love that had weathered every season, endured every challenge, and only grown stronger with time. Outside, the Kansas night wrapped around the ranch, stars glittering overhead, the wind whispering through the grass, the land peaceful and settled under their care. The next morning, as they had for thousands of mornings before, Amos and Eleanor rose with the sun. They dressed and went about their morning routines, checking on the animals, greeting the ranch hands, planning the day's work. When the morning chores were done, they sat on the porch together with coffee, watching the world wake up around them. "Another beautiful day," Eleanor observed, her hand finding Amos's as naturally as breathing. "Every day with you is beautiful," Amos replied, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They had come so far from that stormy night when he had found her protecting a newborn foal, when she had been lost and desperate and alone. They had built a life together that was rich in every way that mattered, in love, in family, in purpose, in joy. Their children were grown and thriving. Their grandchildren were healthy and happy. Their great-grandchildren were carrying forward the legacy they had created. The ranch that Amos had started alone had become a true family enterprise, with multiple generations working the land, breeding and training horses, raising cattle, living the life that Amos and Eleanor had pioneered. The values they had instilled, hard work, honesty, treating people and animals with respect and dignity, had been passed down and would continue to be passed down through the generations. But more than any of that, what they had built was a love story, a partnership that had endured and flourished for more than 5 decades. They had proven that two people from different backgrounds, brought together by chance and storm and a tiny foal in need of help, could create something extraordinary if they were willing to work for it, fight for it, and choose each other every single day. As they sat there in the morning sun, their hands clasped together, their hearts beating in quiet rhythm, they knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face it together. They had built their forever, brick by brick, day by day, love by love. And it was everything, absolutely everything, they had ever dreamed it could be.